director.
Production.
I do a lot of the behind the scenes stuff at Blaze.
Student radio.
Yes, student radio. So my main character that I decided to do was Patience Level Right.
Yeah, you can just either one.
Okay. So basically, who is she and why is she important? She's a lady. So she was an artist who opened a waxworks, which was the kind of colloquial term used for a wax sculpture business after her husband died. And she moved to London in 1772 to continue sculpting there after she felt she needed to expand her enterprise. So the big thing about her was her bold personality and how she just decided to conduct herself in front of London's elite really attracted a lot of people to come sit with her, including the King and Queen of England, which allowed her to have incredible access to London's elite. And she used that time to collect information, and then she would send that back to the patriots in the States. I chose to research and highlight her because she was an outspoken woman in a time when women were not supposed to be outspoken. She was a widow, and it was expected that you would become dependent on another man, and she decided not to do that. And she essentially created her own enterprise and was able to support herself and her family. I personally felt offended on her behalf when I found out that the the US government did not honor her contributions to the war effort. Her sister reached out and said, "My sister has died, please give us some money so we can bring her back to American soil and bury her there." And the US government said no. So without her contributions, the war could have gone very differently because she had access to so many important people in London. I was about to be like, where did it go? So for the portrait, there were several portraits that I could find. The most popular one was done by Robert Edge Pine. That's the top one, and then the bottom one is one of her in her youth, but when the time frame that I'm looking at, she's in her mid 40s. So for the script, there's little evidence because they destroyed everything, because if you got caught with intel on the British government, they were not like, cool, how'd you get that? So I was able to find a few documents. There's one letter that she wrote to Benjamin Franklin that kind of gave me an idea of how she would speak. And then with the help of Professor Hill, I was able to find a voice on 11 Labs that would fit her kind of cadence and how she would have spoken. So this is the talking portrait that I created.
You may call me Mrs. Patience Lovell Wright. I was born in Oyster Bay, New York. In my youth, I married my husband Joseph Wright and moved to Philadelphia. I love art, and after the untimely passing of my dear husband, my sister and I opened a waxworks. In 1772, I moved to London and began sculpting London's elite, including the king himself. The time I spent sculpting gave me ample opportunity to gather information about the British Army from chatty clients who never suspected me, for I was just an artist.
That was the portrait that I made.
You may call me Mrs. Patience.
So when creating her waxworks, there's not a lot of evidence or detail of what these places would have looked like. The only one that I could find that was kind of close was Madame Tussauds, who is very famous. She's got a little museum in Las Vegas and stuff. But she was the more popular version, but Patience Level Right came first, actually. So I kind of modeled it based off of what it would have looked like for a 18th century artist in London, and basing it off of what it would have looked like for Madame Tussauds, because her story was a little more well documented. So she moved to London after her waxworks burned down. She decided, all right, I've done everything that I could here, let me go to London. And I couldn't find exactly where she lived in London, although they have a point on the James Madison Square Garden tour talking about her. No evidence whether or not she lived there or was in the area at the time, but she's important apparently there. And she used spermaceti wax to create her sculptures, which was one of the most popular forms of wax, which is made from whale blubber. Yes. And so that would have been all in her studio, which I kind of have there, and then just cross-referenced what that would have looked like with other artists of the time. So this scene kind of depicts what it would have looked like, and kind of showed how she interacted with her clients and created the sculptures and collected information to send to the patriots. My main goal there was to kind of just give you an idea of what it was like in that situation where, one, you are an American in London, which is very loyal to the crown, and you're still trying to find information that you can send. You're committing treason quite literally under the king's nose. Just as a heads up, like Professor Hill said, I do not have a King George yet. So I have Blue King George, who is not necessarily King Georgey enough, but we will, he's there for the time being. You can kind of skip through. So basically you would see the main area and interact. So we, Professor Hill was able to get a model or create a model of what a wax figure of King George would have looked like, because we do have evidence that she did sculpt him. Most of those haven't survived, just with time and everything. Okay, there, you can kind of see his head. There he is. So I have you explore the space, kind of had wax chunks on the ceiling, and then you get to explore the space, and then I have you interact with patient's level
Pleasure
right.
that I continue my work on your waxwork figure. How have you been?
So and then she walks away, and you get to listen to King George, and part of her shtick was that she was able to get them really comfortable and they'd start talking. So King George is a very chatty
Mrs.
man
Wright,
in
it is
this
a pleasure
one.
to see you again. It has been quite busy of late. Parliament won't meet again until Lord Howe returns with more news, and for now, only about 50 members remain in London. As for John Platt and the other rebels involved in the rebellion, they'll stay in Newgate Jail until we hear more. I've made arrangements for Hessian troops to assist our forces as they prepare to sail for the colonies. Our treaty with the German states should ensure the support we need, and I expect they'll land in New York. On a different note, I've been keeping an eye on the flock of sheep. The wool from Spain's merino
So
sheep
all of that information.
combined.
Oh, no.
Good day, I'm Anna Smith-Strong.
Sorry, technical difficulties. But all that information that King George was talking about was stuff that I found from that letter that she wrote to Benjamin Franklin. And then I kind of just added in that thing about sheep, so it felt a little more conversational for him, because he was known as Farmer George in England. And I found that he got somebody to steal Spanish sheep so he could crossbreed and create a new sheep with better wool. So my second character, who I only created a portrait for, is Anna Smith Strong. I kept with the female spy theme. I kind of like the espionage vibe that I had going. So she's known for her role in the Culper spy ring that operated in New York. They were very instrumental in collecting information that would then support or findings. They were credited with findings of the information on Benedict Arnold's traitor treasonous. But there were no portraits of her, which made this a little difficult, but I was able to find a photo of her descendant, Kate Wheeler Strong, and then cross-reference that with the woman who they had play her in turn, Washington Spies, which was Heather Lynn. And then I was able to combine both of those to create a portrait in Mid-Journey. And then I used my research on her family history and where she lived to create a script that would kind of fit how she would have talked and how she would have behaved.
Good day, I'm Anna Smith-Strong, born in Setauket, New York, on April 14th, 1740. I married Sella Strong III in 1760. During the Revolutionary War, the British imprisoned my dear husband on charges of espionage. But my husband was no spy. That mantle belonged to me. I used my loyalist connections to negotiate his release and secure his parole in Connecticut, where he took our beloved children. I stayed in our home, continuing my clandestine activities under the British's watchful eyes.
And that is my two characters.
going? I'm Matthew DeWeese. So I did Benjamin Eads. So Benjamin was a journalist, and a print shop owner around the mid 1700s. So he was one of the founders of the Boston Gazette. I mean, there's a couple different people who have said to be founded, but it's mostly him and his partner John Gill who did it. So what was the Boston Gazette? It was a newspaper that was considered radical at the time. It actually pushed for a lot of different things, talked a lot about how we need to rebel against the crown, everything like that. And what my scene is based off of is the Boston Gazette was actually the newspaper that financed and organized the Boston Tea Party. So it is said that the Sons of Liberty all met at the print shop. They painted their faces just like Native Americans, and then from there went to the harbor and carried out the Boston Tea Party. So because of this, the British found out that Benjamin Eads was behind it, and so they wanted his head. So this is what my scene shows, is him getting all of his stuff ready, talking about his story, talking about why he has to flee, and then him actually fleeing the print shop with a British officer knocking on his door. And then I chose Benjamin because going through the research and looking at all the different portraits and everything, there wasn't a lot of talk about like journalists or print shops. And so we're a journalism school, and so I really wanted to show how important print shops and journalism was at the time. So for my portrait, this is one of the only portraits of him originally. So we used the AI software, as you'll hear from everyone else, to recreate the portrait and then get an actual talking portrait. And then I used a lot of the research that I had to create the script of him talking. Here's
My name is Benjamin Eads, and I am most pleased to make your acquaintance. Alongside my esteemed partner, John Gill, I had the honor of founding the Boston Gazette, a publication that gained great favor among patriots during these times. Through our humble paper, we worked to reveal the truth of the taxes imposed upon us by the British Crown, taxes levied without representation or consent of the people. It is said that I may have had a hand in stirring certain protests against these injustices, which perhaps drew the attention of the British authorities, so much so that I was compelled to flee Boston before they could seize me.
All right. And then for my scene,
My name is Benjamin.
So I created a small 1700 print shop where he would tell his story while he's getting ready to flee. And so with this, I really focused on using one character to tell the entire story instead of involving a bunch of different ones. And so I put a lot of time into the animation work and everything. Unfortunately, I don't have that for you. Just my recording was not what I needed it to be. But if you would like to check out my scene, it's very cool. But there's over 50 different animation controls for him running around his scene and everything like that. And so I really liked the way I did this. I think I had one character tell the whole story instead of relying on different people. And so it's very interesting to work on that. And then that's the inspiration for my scene, just a simple print shop of how it works. So here's just a walk around of my scene. So you can see the actual printing press in the middle, ink bottles. There's copies of the actual Boston Gazette that I found. There's a whole library and everything of them online. And so you can actually read through a lot of them and see it all. And so I took one of those and I put it on the table and other things. And then this is my second character. So his name is Samuel Whitmore. You might have heard of him. He's said to be 78, 80 years old when he did this, but you can't really know at the time. And then when the British were going back to Boston, they were fleeing or they were retreating. They walked on his property and he grabbed a musket and a horse pistol, and he shot and killed confirmed 2, maybe 3. They didn't confirm the third one, but they think he shot a third one. And then afterwards, the British retaliated on him. They shot him in the face. They stabbed him with a bayonet 6 times, and they beat him with the butts of their musket for him killing the British soldiers. He was left for dead. And then he actually survived another 18 years and lived to be 98 years old or 96, wherever you want to put him. So lived a very long life, was able to tell the story and everything. So here is his talking portrait.
I am honored to make your acquaintance. My name is Samuel Whitmore. I am but a humble farmer, now in my 78th year. I have lived a long life, but on the 19th of April, 1775, as the British troops were in retreat to Boston, I deemed it my time to act. With my musket in hand and a horse pistol by my side, I took aim and felled 2 British soldiers, perhaps even a third, though I cannot say for certain. In their retaliation, I was shot in the face, stabbed through with a bayonet 6 times, and beaten savagely with the butts of their muskets. They left me for dead, but I wasn't going to let the British finish me. I survived that day and lived another 18 years, carrying with me the tale of that fateful encounter.
And so one of the challenges with Samuel is his original portrait that I had is him actually much younger. They did not have another portrait of him after he did this. And so it was, I had to use AI to figure out how to make him older with the help of Professor Hill. And we came up with this portrait, which I think was really cool.
So, Alex, you're on.
Thank you so much, everybody. I think Professor Hill mentioned when the presentation began that it's important to spotlight the contributions of like lesser known figures in the American Revolution, how they helped us ultimately win the war. And I think that is especially true for like African Americans, since they are in a minority. I feel it is very sort of easy to overlook how they contributed. And I really I decided to spotlight an African American who I believe really contributed to like really sealing the deal at the Battle of Yorktown, James Armistead Lafayette. I have my scene right here just to begin with, and I'll get into how I ultimately ended up creating it with Professor Hill later. If you'd like me to play it now or go
Yes,
on.
please.
Attention, gentlemen. Our provisions are low, but we shall make do for the time being. We will establish camp here and await the arrival of our supply ships from New York. Once our stores have been replenished, we shall press on with our campaign through Virginia with all the vigor and resolve required. Remain vigilant and prepared, for the tasks ahead will demand nothing less of us.
Cornwallis is stationed for the moment, awaiting supplies and reinforcements. I must find a way to leave this British camp and deliver this intelligence to the Continental Army so they may take advantage of the situation. I may inform Cornwallis that I intend to travel west to gather intelligence on Lafayette's movements.
The quality's a bit muffled, but I think that's just how it's quoted. So who is James Armistead? He was born a slave to John Armistead, and that's where you got the name, around mid-December of 1748 in Virginia. He would enlist in the Continental Army with the permission of his master, who was placed under the command of Marquis de Lafayette in 1781. He would ultimately take on the name James Armistead Lafayette after the war concluded. He served as a double agent for the Continental Army, initially under Benedict Arnold after he defected, and later General Cornwallis. He posed as a runaway slave, and he gained favor with the British through his knowledge of the terrain. He would guide them around, and through positioning their redcoats movement, it would also give him information to return to the Continental Army with. Gained favor and ultimately got very close to the British command, General Cornwallis, Benedict Arnold, the people who were really calling the shots during that time. And why I say he really helped seal the deal with the Continental Army being able to force General Cornwallis to surrender during the Battle of Yorktown is that he was ultimately a spy under General Cornwallis, and as Cornwallis moved to Yorktown, he was one of the spies who provided that information to Lafayette, Washington, giving them the opportunity to surround him and set up what would ultimately become the Battle of Yorktown. It can be argued that without his contributions, things may have turned out very differently. There might not have even been a Battle of Yorktown as it was. So there are no official photographs of James Armistead Lafayette since they were born in the time of cameras. There is this portrait I included right there, and there's another portrait in color and one painting that depicts him with Lafayette. I used the portrait in color as a reference for this, and then I went into Leonardo AI and used the portrait as a reference to create a talking portrait for Lafayette, and I used Play HD to create his own voice.
When Benedict Arnold defected to the British, how did the Americans know of his activities before the Battle of Yorktown? Because I, James Armistead Lafayette, snuck behind enemy lines in Virginia under the guise of a runaway slave to spy on the enemy. The British believed I was spying on the Americans for them, but I was acting as a spy for the Americans. I gave written, detailed reports to other American spies. I was born into slavery and lived most of my life on a plantation until I was given permission by my master to enlist in Marquis de Lafayette's army. I would get intel from the British, give it to the Americans, and in turn feed the British false information. I renamed myself James Armistead Lafayette after the general I served.
So for the scene, I think I showed it up at the beginning. I created a simple beach scene featuring Armistead over here in Cornwallis as he's stationed in Yorktown. He's talking to his soldiers about how he wants to stay there and wait for British ships that are coming from New York City with supplies. But hidden from sight, the player follows Armistead to a stable where he's away from anybody who may know what he has on his person or know who he is, and he's thinking about just how he's going to get out of this situation under the eye of Cornwallis and ultimately be in a position to send the news to the Continental Army. I think the hardest challenge creating the scene is pinpointing exactly what the scenario would be where Lafayette would be able to leave the British Army and send the information to the Continental Army. As you can see, there's this map here. Me and Professor Hill, we sort of observed the movements of the Allies, of the British soldiers that ultimately culminated in the Battle of Yorktown. And if you can see, you can see the ultimate clash at Yorktown, I judged that the best scenario would be for him going west inland, where the Allies would be more likely to be moving, where he could contact a spy, and then the spy could relay the information to Lafayette. The second character I'd like to spotlight is Salem Poor, another character who I believe is a pretty integral figure to the revolution, but may not be as widespread as some of the other figures, such as George Washington. He was born enslaved in 1747 in Andover, Massachusetts, worked on a farm, and ultimately bought his freedom on a year's salary at the time. Upon buying his freedom, he enlisted in the Massachusetts Army under Captain Benjamin Ames, and he participated in the Battle of Bunker Hill, where he is credited, and this is one of his more important contributions, he fatally injured James Abercrombie, who was a British lieutenant general. Just like James Armistead's portrait, I used a portrait of Salem Poor as a reference. I placed it into Leonardo AI and had the program generate a portrait of him, which would be less like a portrait and more like an actual person talking, and I used Play HT to design the voice for it.
My name is Salem Poor. Born a slave, I bought my freedom from my master in 1769 on a year's salary. In 1775, I became one of the Massachusetts Minutemen under Captain James Fry. I would go on to participate in 5 battles of the Revolutionary War, among them the Battle of Bunker Hill. I mortally wounded James Abercrombie, a British lieutenant colonel who jumped on our fort and yelled at us to surrender.
No, the script says Lieutenant Colonel, the text says Lieutenant General. They're both possible.
Just double check, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Sons of the American Revolution, told you. We would have experts up in here. So thank you, but anything else you see, we'll just go back and double check on that. So Maddie, you're up.
My name is Salem Poor.
I'm not simple. I'm Maddie. So a little bit about my inspiration, my characters. My first one is Hercules Mulligan. If you haven't heard of him, you may have from the musical Hamilton. That is where I got my characters from, or my inspiration for them from. So let's get started. So Mulligan is known for his spy work during the American Revolution. He aided the patriot cause through his work as a tailor. So as a tailor, he served New York's elite. He mainly served British officers or British military clientele in, at the time, Manhattan, New York. So his role was instrumental in not only saving Washington's life, but also evading many battles and providing vital intel against the British. So this is Mulligan's portrait. The middle picture is what we believe he looked like. This is the portrait that's most widely accepted of him. There isn't a real one of him. So as you can see on the right is the one I created based off of this middle portrait, and on the left, that is the one that our graphic designer, that Ms. Ho, has received or will receive. So the result is...
One would never suspect I served as a spy for General George Washington. I am Hercules Mulligan, born in Ireland in 1740 to Hugh and Sarah Mulligan. We came to New York when I was but 6 years old. I attended King's College and soon after wed my beloved wife, Elizabeth Sanders, niece to a notable admiral of His Majesty's Navy. My allegiance to American liberty never wavered. Some claim that my influence fostered Alexander Hamilton's patriotism while he resided with me. As proprietor of my father's tailor shop, I turned my British military clientele to the advantage of our cause, serving the revolution in secret.
So if you are a Hamilton fan, you actually learn that Hercules Mulligan played a vital role in Hamilton coming to New York and becoming the man that we know him as. So he actually let him stay with him when he got to the US from the Caribbean. That's where they kind of fostered each other's revolution, beliefs, and kind of how he became a spy, how Hamilton got into the military. So this is kind of the inspiration I had for Mulligan's tailor shop. These are a little bit more fancy, dressed up. So Mulligan's shop was a little bit smaller, but still very elegant because he did serve the New York elite. So he had a tailor and haberdashery shop located in Manhattan. He preferred working closely with his clients. So in these pictures, you'll actually see sewing machines. He did not use sewing machines. He preferred to work on his client's needle and thread. That is how he gained his intelligence. That's how he got to give up information. That's where he excelled. So we'll see if we can get this to work. So some of us had a little bit of a screen recording issue. So I'm gonna have to play the audio for you as we get started on the video.
One would never suspect I served as a spy for General George Washington. I am Hercules Mulligan, born in Ireland in 1740 to Hugh and Sarah Mulligan. We came to New York when I was but 6 years old. I attended King's College and soon after wed my beloved wife, Elizabeth Sanders, niece to a notable admiral of His Majesty's Navy. My allegiance to American liberty never wavered. Some claim that my influence fostered Alexander Hamilton's patriotism while he resided with me. As proprietor of my father's tailor shop, I turned my British military clientele to the advantage of our cause, serving the revolution in secret.
So now I'm gonna let you guys see my scene. So this is kind of just a little walkthrough of it. I'll talk while this is going. So my blue guy is Hercules Mulligan. It will not be blue tomorrow. So what you just heard is what's happening right now. You will go up and interact with him. Once you do, you will say his little piece, tell you about him, his shop. So as you can see, you kind of look around. It's small, darker, elegant. You know, it's just on the street, walking through Manhattan. He has fabric rolls everywhere. He is sitting right by British military officer who he is working on, because as I kind of stated, he only works closely and personally with those people. Another thing that he would do, so the way he would get this information from his shop to wherever it needed to go, was his slave, Cato Howe. There is actually, Miss Hill has had a student that also did that character in previous semesters. So that's a big piece of it. He would give that information to his slave, transfer it there. That's how he was never caught. So what is going on right here is just walking around. It's showing you a little bit about him. That first tab was him eavesdropping on his clients. So he would he was very good with his words, very good with articulation. So he knew how to get people to tell him what he needed to know. He was very casual with it. Again, he was just a tailor, so you could tell him whatever, it wouldn't matter. So this is kind of about his spy networks. He was involved with the Sons of Liberty and the spy ring. So that's kind of how really got into spying, but again, it was mainly through his tailor shop. And he served it directly through his slave and directly to George Washington usually. And then that's just a little bit of wrap up and extra facts about him. So okay, that is it about Hercules Mulligan. My second character is John Lawrence, also from Hamilton, if you have seen the musical. So in Hamilton, he is known as Hamilton's best friend. So that is true, but not to the extent that the musical lets you believe. So what he is known for is he was basically the right-hand man or aide-de-camp to General George Washington. So he served as his trusted assistant, his confidant. He kind of did the small tasks that weren't so small at the time. So he was a big advocate for the abolition of slavery, and the way he wanted to do this was to get slaves enlisted in the army, and then that would be their freedom, or they would be allowed to buy their freedom through that. So this is what he proposed and pushed for throughout his time in the Continental Army. He was unsuccessful in creating it to the level he wanted, but he was able to get, I believe it was 2 battalions with slaves in them who were eventually freed. But he did unfortunately die a few months before the war ended in a small skirmish. So unfortunately, he was not able to fully go through his plan. And then this is the portrait we created on him.
One would never suspect I served as a spy for General George Washington. I am Hercules Mulligan, born in Ireland in 1740 to Hugh and Sarah Mulligan. We came to New York when I was but 6 years old. I attended...
Well, all right, that is the wrong one, but
We'll fix that.
okay, we'll fix that. But yeah, a little bit about him. He was in a big family. He was very rich, very well off. He spoke fluent French. So he actually did go to both England and France for studies for his military time. So he was more so an advisor in France and more with the studies in England. So he was very well off. His father had many slaves. So he kind of learned about it through that. And him and his father both decided that is where they wanted to go. They wanted to be fully free, fully equal. And he got his father on board. And so that's where he started to try to convince Washington and those other big people you hear about to also go with this plan. And he began to. But unfortunately, Washington was not a huge fan of that plan. It's more on Hamilton's side with that. That's John Lawrence.
Bring it all home.
I know I'm the last one, so I'll try and expedite it a little bit, be a little time sensitive. So my first character is William Henry. So he was, shoes is what I focused on for this project, but he was a businessman far beyond shoes. He manufactured many things, including guns, shoes, flowers, hats. I said shoes twice just to emphasize. He had an interesting pay structure. So he was originally on a salary, but the American government provided incentivization and paid him basically, commission per thing that he manufactured. So with shoes, he started out in 1779. with a 90% earning commission, and then eventually increase that up to 94% commission just on his widespread manufacturing of shoes. A popular quote from George Washington is, "A number of men remain confined to hospitals for want of shoes, and others in farmers' houses on the same account. We have by a field return this day made no less than 2,898 men now in camp unfit for duty because they're barefoot and otherwise naked." Kind of on a different note, the reason why I chose this project is timely now. The massive capitalization that you see with military efforts and outsourcing to third-party companies and everything like that, I thought it was very interesting. Kind of a more bureaucratic sense on war, especially in those times, that it was still prevalent then, not to the stages of Honeywell and everything nowadays, but still in some fact. So this is the portrait of him, and then AI portrait. Here is the initial product.
In April 1778, the Congress's Board of War appointed me the Superintendent of Arms and Military Accoutrements for the Continental Army. Throughout 1778, I supplied shoes and boots to the Continental Army. General Washington appointed me Commissary of Hides for the states of Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland. These appointments licensed me to pay men to produce the items that state and continental forces needed. I purchased leather, hired and paid workmen, and established the shoe factories at Philadelphia, Allentown, and Lancaster. I ensured the finished products were distributed to the military leaders who requested them. In April 1778,
So scene creation, I wanted to, kind of create the environment of an outpost for manufacturing shoes. Now, he wasn't actually on site most of the time doing the day-to-day creation of some of these products, but, as a large-scale businessman, he would obviously visit sometimes, and in the scene, he's visiting one of his shoe manufacturing plants and just overseeing. You can see, as many people have talked about, that's his projected model that I'm going to get tomorrow. To preface, my scene's a little bit different than some of the other scenes, just because as it's in a Pennsylvania forest, there's supposed to be a large amount of trees, but how we create things in Unity and port them over to spatial, there's a certain amount of mesh vertices that you're able to have. So the trees, it might look like a desolate wasteland, but that's just because we can't actually add the trees in Unity because it would, a few hundred trees would breach the mesh vertice count. So instead we have to add them post once we get all the avatars. Here's my scene. Obviously, it's fairly desolate. So here are some of the workers. You can probably tell their animations look a bit archaic. We actually had, we get all our animations from Mixamo. Here's the architect's prompt, which...
As you can see here, our enterprise is fully engaged. General Washington and the troops will no longer want for shoes. No army can be sustained without food or boots. My efforts to assemble hiders, tanners, leather workers and stitchers in one location has increased production by many folds. I have contracted for the making of up to 200,000 pairs of shoes, a vast quantity, much of which I have financed at my own expense. While I am no longer directly engaged in the making of these shoes myself, nor do I personally oversee the workings of any one factory, my efforts are now directed towards the management and observation of several manufacturers located in Philadelphia, Allentown, and Lancaster. Thus, it is with confidence that I send you to speak with my workers, who are well versed in their craft and charged with the production of these vital goods. Fare you well.
Aspects. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the aspects is the animation. So we originally had, we pull all of our animations from a creator called Mixamo, so we don't personally rig the animations ourselves, but that poses its own challenges because you have a subset of animations that you can pick from, and some of them are harder to find than others, such as getting somebody to work on something, and inherently downloading these animations, they pose some issues. So I originally had an animation where cut the keyframes where it looks like they're working, and then you loop it, but it's on a short loop, and The issue is every few loops, it would sink the people further into the ground. So we had to, in the short term, we had to go with these animations, changed it actually basically a few classes ago. But that's one of the future optimization pathways for projects like this is, as constantly expands and there's constantly, new AI generative content. Same can be said for Unity and outsourcing our materials from Unity and finding, other alternatives for some of these animations or, possibly figuring out how to fix some of the rigging and everything like that ourselves. This is not, one more, I don't know why I said that. It's Bernardo de Galvez. So he is governor of Spanish Louisiana. He had a variety of war efforts, primarily naval, and around Mobile, Alabama, and particularly Louisiana. Galveston, Texas is named after him. I'm actually from Dallas, Texas, so pretty nice there. But although not technically allies with the United States, he was sent to secure friendship with the United States in the fact of, his territory was purchased later and Louisiana purchased, but at the time, taking the land from France and having it as Spain, he was, during wartime, somewhat alliance efforts, but not official, and it, eventually got him to have his portrait hanging in the U.S. Capitol.
I am Bernardo Vicente de Galvez y Madrid. Since the age of 16, I have served as a soldier in the Spanish army. Though I hail from Spain, my disdain for the British compelled me to lend my support to the colonists in their valiant struggle. Aside from constructing vital supply lines, I suppressed the British Navy in the Gulf, and following their defeat, I was entrusted with drafting the Treaty of Paris. As governor of Louisiana, I triumphed over those British at Natchez, Baton Rouge, and Mobile, Alabama.
As you can see, working on these projects, it's a constant work in progress. And, we've come a long way. And when you go back and you look at some of the animations done years ago by different entities, AI has given journalism students and other people the ability to create content that they would need a lot of different specialties in order to do. And that's the good thing about AI. And there's a lot of worry about jobs lost, both within our trade as well as in, the screenwriters and all of that. But more and more stories can be told, being able to go back and finding these unique stories of women, of African Americans. We have some with Native Americans. We need more Native Americans, I think, to round this out. Older people, teenagers, people who really stepped up. And that's the thing that I really want people to get from this is that ordinary citizens volunteered to put their lives, their livelihood, and their freedoms at risk in order to birth this country. And it constantly amazes me that they did that, in so many different ways. We know how the story turned out, but we wanted to show how we got there. And then, Ken Burns has always been my hero and my inspiration to find these small stories and be able to tell them. And I think the students did a good job and didn't get too frustrated, when they would lose things like Maddie, I think lost her entire scene once, maybe twice. But we just kept on going.